Before we go any further, I need to tell you something most people won't say out loud. Not every war happens in a battlefield under the spotlight. Some begin at family dinners, hidden behind cold hugs and smiles sharp as knives. This story is about that, about seeing what no one wants to see, about protecting what you built with blood, grit, and dignity. If this message resonates with you, hit subscribe and stay until the end. Because sometimes, justice whispers loudest when everything else goes quiet. My name is Helen Rivers. I'm 67 years old. I spent nearly 4 decades teaching history in the small town of Savannah, Georgia, before retiring and dedicating myself to restoring the family farm that's been in our blood for generations. It's an old place, with a white wooden porch, pine floors that creak beneath your feet, and the smell of fresh brewed coffee lingering in the morning air. It was in that very home, between towering trees and a newly restored barn, that I raised my grandson, Vincent. The boy who became my entire world after life took my daughter far too soon. That August afternoon was sweltering. I was sitting on the porch, a glass of iced tea in hand and an open book resting on my lap. Vincent walked up with the sun in his eyes and that eager smile only a young man in love can wear. He didn't need to say a word. I already knew. "Grandma, I'm getting married," he said, his voice laced with joy. Georgia's heat was already thick, but what I felt in that moment was a cold shiver crawling up the back of my neck, a warning. An old whisper from the scars life had already etched into me. Her name was Bianca Taylor. She was beautiful, flawless, really. Blonde, graceful, her voice sweet like honey poured from fine china. But something about her didn't sit right. Something hiding behind those perfectly measured gestures and practiced smiles. I smiled back. That's what grandmothers do. We smile when our hearts want to scream. Because sometimes the ones we love most have to learn by stumbling. The ceremony was going to be held right there on the farm, at Vincent's request. The wedding rehearsal took place on a golden afternoon, sunlight filtering through the linen curtains and the scent of lavender floating through the air. The house buzzed with chatter, heels tapping on old wooden floors, forced laughter, and perfume too expensive for a casual day in the countryside. Bianca arrived wearing a light beige dress, her golden curls pinned into a low bun, makeup immaculate. Her entrance felt rehearsed, like a scene from a well-directed film, every move calculated to charm. "Mrs. Rivers," she said, extending her hand with a polished smile too perfect to be real. I shook her hand. It was cold, cold like marble. "Pleasure is mine, Bianca," I replied evenly, hiding the wave of suspicion that had just surged through me. I watched her, every movement, every glance, and in one of those moments when no one else was paying attention, I saw what wasn't meant to be seen. A man, young, well-dressed, too self-assured to be just another guest. Bianca greeted him like someone you don't just meet, you remember. The way she laughed, the way her eyes lingered on his. It wasn't casual, it was familiar. I wouldn't hear his name until days later, Daniel Carter. But in that moment, between the clinking of glasses and forks resting on ceramic plates, I knew. A storm was coming, and it wasn't going to be small. I stood there watching, like someone who's seen this movie before. And the worst part? I already knew exactly how it would end. Summer seemed to grow heavier with each passing day in Georgia. The cicadas sang loudly from the oak trees, and the air carried that thick, sticky humidity that clung to your skin and made time feel slower, heavier. Every morning the house smelled of old wood and fresh cornbread from the oven. But even that couldn't soothe the tightness in my chest. Vincent had been restless. He used to be so full of life, always talking, always laughing, brimming with ideas. But lately his steps had grown shorter, his eyes less certain. Even surrounded by celebrations and wedding preparations, it was like he was trying to keep a house of cards from collapsing with every shaky breath. One muggy evening, we sat together in the living room. The ceiling fan turned lazily above us, just pushing the heat from one corner to another. He perched at the edge of the worn leather sofa, fingers interlocked, shoulders tense. "Grandma," he began, not meeting my eyes. "I need a favor." I set my embroidery aside, giving him my full attention. He cleared his throat, nervous. "I bought Bianca's wedding dress, but I'm kind of maxed out on my card. Do you think you could help cover the rest?" The question fell to the floor like a teacup shattering in silence. I looked at him, really looked, for what felt like a very long time. "Vincent," I said slowly, my voice calm like a gray morning, "a gift shouldn't be bought out of fear, and trust isn't something you pay off with credit." He furrowed, his brow confused. He had expected a yes, maybe even with a smile. "But it's her dress, Grandma. The wedding's next week." "Exactly. You should have talked to me before, not after." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Love can't be built on debt, not like this. He stood up, clearly uncomfortable. His mouth opened, then closed again, like he was trying to argue, but couldn't find the words. Finally, he just muttered, "I'll figure it out. Forget it." He left the room with his shoulders slumped, and every part of me wanted to run after him, to hold him, to shield him from the world. But sometimes, protecting someone means letting them learn, even if it hurts. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of the front door slamming. My daughter Lillian stormed in, her heels clicking furiously across the hardwood floor. Her face was twisted with outrage. "How could you, Mom?" she asked, voice trembling, eyes blazing. "He's your grandson. He asked for a little help, and you humiliated him like that?" "Lillian," I started, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "You always do this, always meddling where you shouldn't. He's in love. It was just a dress." "It's because he's in love," I said firmly, "that someone has to keep their head straight." She huffed and started pacing the room like a whirlwind of perfume and frustration. Her energy made the air in the room even heavier. "I'll pay for it, okay?" she snapped. "But don't think this will be forgotten." "I'm not looking for applause," I replied. "I just want him to see things clearly." But Lillian was already gone, slamming the door behind her. And in that moment, I knew the cracks in the floor had started to spread. And no one wanted to look down. The days that followed were full of rehearsals, packages arriving, anxious texts flying back and forth, and a layer of forced joy painted over everything like varnish on rotting wood. No one said anything, but I could tell. They felt it. Something was off. They just didn't know what it was. But I did. The wedding was approaching like a runaway train. No one seemed willing to slow it down, least of all Vincent. Family, friends, neighbors, everyone appeared enchanted by the promise of a grand celebration. But I saw it differently. The house was full. Every room had been overtaken by last-minute preparations, boxes stacked on the porch, arrangements of white flowers, embroidered fabrics with names and dates stitched in gold. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, hot glue, and satin ribbons. But there was something else, too. A bittersweet smell of unspoken tension lingered. I watched everything from a distance, pretending to sew, pretending to rest, pretending to be just a proud grandmother. But my eyes noticed every detail, the way Bianca spoke to the vendors, to Vincent, to Lillian, always sweet, always polite, but with a tone that flirted with disdain. On the Friday before the wedding, the rehearsal took place outside, on the edge of the farm. The evening light bathed the field in soft gold, and the usual Georgia heat felt gentler with the breeze coming off the river. To the untrained eye, everything looked perfect. I sat under the oldest oak tree, rocking slowly in my chair. From where I was, I could see everyone. And that's when my eyes found Daniel Carter again. It was always him. He showed up at every event, always near Bianca, always smiling, but never crossing any lines. He made sure to appear like the good childhood friend. But there was something in the way his eyes searched for her whenever she entered the room. There was a story there, one that hadn't been told yet. They met near the old barn, away from the noise. A gravel path led to the back of the property, just far enough that only the observant would notice who came and went. Bianca wore a cream-colored dress, her hair loose, makeup still perfect despite the heat. Daniel waited, leaning casually against the fence, arms crossed, a little too relaxed. What I saw that evening, no one else did. But I've never needed more than a second to recognize a full truth. She walked up to him with a smile she didn't use on anyone else. He greeted her with a soft touch on the waist, a gesture far too intimate for just friends. They spoke quietly, very quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the looks. And sometimes, the most dangerous things are hidden in what goes unsaid. Bianca threw her head back in laughter at something he said. And in that moment, the breeze carried something deeper to me. Absence. The absence of truth in her gaze toward Vincent. The absence of any real emotion in the preparations. She was living in two worlds, one for the cameras and the applause, and another, secretive, complicit, and on the verge of collapse. That night, while the house slept, I went into the study. I pulled out my old journal and began to write, just like I had done since I was young. But for the first time in years, my hands trembled. There is something rotten behind these layers of lace. Bianca's beauty is a mask, and Vincent is blind. I have to protect what I can, but without taking away his chance to learn. Because truth, when it comes from others, feels like an attack, but when it burns from within, it becomes a lesson. I closed the journal with a knot in my stomach. Upstairs, Vincent's light was still on. I pictured him sitting on the edge of his bed, dreaming about tomorrow, unaware of the earthquake heading his way. A tear slipped down my cheek. It wasn't sadness, it was helplessness, the kind of pain only a grandmother knows when she sees the storm coming, but can't stand in its path. The big day arrived with the distant rumble of thunder. The sky, once clear, now carried on the horizon the same tension I felt tightening in my chest. It was as if nature itself had decided to mirror what my heart already knew. The house was quiet in the early hours. Only the faint sounds of cars, pulling into the driveway, hurried footsteps upstairs, and the distant hum of a blow-dryer from the guest room broke the stillness. The strong scent of freshly delivered flowers filled the hallway, mingling with the warm cinnamon bread the cook had left cooling on the counter. By 10 a.m., I went downstairs to check on the final details. The garden was pristine, each chair lined up like soldiers on parade. The white floral arrangement stood out against the damp grass from the night before. The altar, set up in front of the lake, reflected a picture-perfect scene, almost cinematic. But no amount of beauty could conceal the fracture quietly spreading beneath it all. At 11, I was invited to one last meeting with the coordinators. Bianca was there, of course. Sitting next to Lillian, she commanded the room with near-military precision. "Helen," she said, eyes still fixed on her clipboard, "we thought it might be better if you didn't sit up front. You know, just to keep the visual clean in, the photos. The ceremony's going to have a very minimalist aesthetic." The words hung in the air like a slap without sound. Time stood still. She didn't ask me. She told me, Vincent's grandmother, the owner of the farm, the one who provided it all. She didn't want me to ruin the look of her perfect scene, as if I were a piece of outdated furniture, as if my presence was a design flaw. Lillian looked away, clearly embarrassed. Vincent wasn't in the room. "Of course," I replied. my voice calm, with a soft smile. Aesthetic is important. No one noticed the slight tremble in my hand as I adjusted my necklace. No one saw the pain splitting through my chest, but I'd learned long ago how to hide a hurricane under a linen dress. I walked slowly back to my room, down the same hallways I had painted with my own hands, past the frames that held generations of our family. I sat in front of the mirror and stared at my reflection for a long time. My gray hair had been pinned back with care. My makeup was simple but steady. I wasn't out of place. I was the root of that family, and they had pushed me to the back of the room, like an old portrait. When it was time for the ceremony, I did exactly what was asked of me. I sat in the last row under the shade of the old oak, while everyone else huddled together for selfies and Instagram stories. And from my quiet corner, I watched. I saw Vincent standing at the altar. I saw Bianca emerge from the house in a gown designed to dazzle. And I saw, among the guests, Daniel. He wasn't hiding anymore. He stood confidently, front and center, as if he were part of the main cast. Bianca smiled, but it wasn't at Vincent. My heart clenched. The lump in my throat grew into an ocean of memories and silent grief. I held myself together, because it wasn't time to act. Not yet. But my eyes saw everything. The sky threatened rain, but it never came, at least not outside. The weeks following the wedding felt like a freshly harvested field after a storm, too quiet, too tidy. But the soil was still damp, releasing a strong scent of warning. Bianca and Vincent returned from their honeymoon with a polished glow in their eyes. It was all too rehearsed. Smiles for the relatives, hands gently, clasped at dinner, promises of bright futures tossed into the air like confetti. But beneath the words, silence spread like weeds. It was on a gray morning, the kind where even the birds hesitated to sing among the orchard trees, that Vincent asked to talk. We sat in the reading room, where the scent of old leather books mixed with polished wood. He held a brown folder tightly in his hands, his knuckles pale from tension. "Grandma," he said, settling in front of me, "I wanted to share some news." I nodded gently. He looked like a little boy again, searching for the courage to say something he didn't fully believe himself. Bianca's father, Richard Taylor, is teaching me about investing. He owns a company called Nexus Capital. They work with fractals and scalable opportunities. I had to fight my expression. Fractals? Was that the spell they were casting now? "This is going to be big, Grandma," he went on, energized. "He said I can start small, using part of the farm's assets. Then we scale up. Bianca thinks it's a great idea. She says I'm finally showing initiative." My heart, which had been calm, clenched like a door forced shut by a gust of wind. "And do you trust him?" I asked, carefully weighing each syllable. Vincent hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. He's experienced, a visionary. He believes in me, and, well, he's family now. Ah, the old trick. Trust by association. I'd seen this movie before. "And have you looked into this nexus?" "Checked. The numbers, the track record, the contracts. Grandma, you're always suspicious of everything. I need this. I need to grow. Stop being just Helen Rivers' grandson." That sentence cut deeper than he realized. He stood up, frustrated, trying not to show that my words had hit him. But they had. I saw it in the subtle twitch of his jaw, in the way he adjusted his collar like it could shield him from what he didn't want to hear. "I know you want what's best for me, but let me try it my way, okay?" He walked out with a determined stride and the kind of proud hurt only the young and in love can carry. And I stayed there, alone, surrounded by books, knowing the first domino had been pushed. That afternoon, I sat down at the old computer and started digging. Nexus Capital, Richard Taylor, Fractal Investment Strategy. The websites were filled with buzzwords, but my instincts were sharper than any algorithm. Too many things didn't add up. Business addresses that didn't match, names that changed, from city to city, and a mountain of lawsuits buried beneath technical jargon. I closed the laptop and stared out the window toward the fields. The wind bent the cornstalks back and forth, strong, relentless, but none of them snapped. That's how I felt. Bent, but unbroken. That night, as I lay in bed, the rain began to fall, a soft, steady rain, like a warning. And I whispered to myself, if I have to, I'll go all the way. Truth has a strange way of hiding. It whispers when the world is craving applause. It moves quietly through small gestures. It never arrives screaming. But once it does, there's no turning back. Vincent began to change, not all at once, but slowly, like the dimming glow of a light bulb fading day by day. His once enthusiastic voice became rushed. His visits became fewer, and his eyes told the story. His mouth refused to speak. He was tired, worn down, still clinging to the image, but struggling to carry the weight of it. That night, he came home later than usual. His boots were caked with dirt, his shirt wrinkled, and his expression, a strange mix of anxiety and pride. "Grandma, I sold that piece of land behind the barn." I turned to him slowly. "What did you just say?" "The land. The one you gave me for my 21st birthday. It was just overgrown brush anyway. And Richard said it could be my seed money for something big." Silence. The world could have collapsed around me right then, and I still would have heard the sound of my heart breaking. Because it wasn't about the land. It was about what he'd sacrificed for a promise. "You sold a piece of who we are for a project with Richard?" "Grandma, it's not like that. It's an investment. Growth. You've always told me to think about the future. And you really think this is thinking ahead? Handing over our land to a man you barely know?" He closed his eyes for a beat, took a deep breath, as if trying to stay composed. "You've never liked Bianca, or her father. You question everything. I'm trying to do something on my own, build something real, and all you see are threats. The pain of being misunderstood by someone you love is a double-edged knife. It cuts them, and it makes you bleed too." I didn't answer. I just sat down. He left a few minutes later, his shoulders tight, his pride bruised. I stayed there, staring into the fire, feeling like time was running out. The next day, I went to talk to Lillian. I tried to explain, tried to show her what I was seeing, but she looked at me like I was chasing ghosts. "Helen, you're seeing monsters where there's only opportunity. Richard might be, yes, a little flashy, but he believes in Vincent. And honestly, that's more than I can say about you right now." "He's not betting on Vincent," I said, firm. "He's betting on our name. And he'll use it until there's nothing left." Lillian crossed her arms, eyes flaring. "You're jealous. This is about control. You can't stand the fact that he's grown up. Let him live, Mom." "Living, yes. Being deceived? No." She shook her head, disbelieving, and walked out of the room without another word. Another door shut, another invisible crack opened between us, and in that silence that followed, I knew I was alone in this fight. That same night, I made a decision. It was no longer time to wait. It was time to seek the truth, to show, with facts, what words had failed to prove. I hired a private investigator, a discreet man, recommended by an old friend from my university days. His name was Mason Clark, and his eyes were as sharp as a butcher's blade. I asked him to dig deep, to follow the money, to watch not only Richard, but also Daniel, that close friend of Bianca's. "Help me see what no one else wants to see, Mr. Clark," I told him, meeting his gaze with the quiet resolve of someone who has buried more than just dreams in her lifetime. "And don't you dare soften the truth." He nodded silently. Then he left, and I knew whatever he found might hurt, but it would hurt far more to keep pretending everything was fine. Mornings at the farm had become quiet again, but not the quiet of peace. It was the silence of questions no one dared to ask. The tense silence that spreads when everyone senses something is wrong, but chooses to pretend otherwise. Mason Clark called me 7 days later. His voice was low, dry, and straight to the point. "Mrs. Rivers, I found what you feared, and maybe a little more." That sentence hung in the air like dust in an old house. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. We arranged to meet at a quiet little cafe in Augusta. The sky was overcast that day, and a cold wind whipped through the flags in front of the courthouse. I took a seat at a table in the back, where the light was dim, and Mason arrived carrying a leather folder and a heavy look on his face. I started with Richard Taylor. His record is messy. 3 failed companies in the last 8 years, 2 civil fraud lawsuits, hidden debts under shell partners, and a business address that's actually just an empty warehouse in Jacksonville. I opened the folder with steady hands, though my heart pounded like a war drum. "There's more," he continued. "Bianca Taylor, real name, Bianca Torres. Legally changed it at 19. She was married before, briefly. No public record of the divorce, but the ex-husband works at a resort in the Bahamas and described the relationship as manipulative and controlling." I looked at Mason. "And Daniel?" "Daniel Carter," he said, voice heavy, "is co-owner of a nightclub in Charleston. Fancy on the outside, but flagged multiple times for suspicious activity. He and Bianca show up together on several security cameras, including one from 3 days before the wedding." My hands trembled slightly as he handed me a flash drive. "You'll want to see this for yourself." Back at the farm, I waited until everyone was asleep. Only then did I sit down at my computer. The night was quiet, except for the chirping of crickets and the occasional creak of old floorboards beneath the house. I plugged in the drive and pressed play. The footage was black and white. A high-end bar, dimly lit. People laughing, dancing, clinking glasses. And in the far right corner of the screen, them, Bianca and Daniel. She touched his arm with familiarity. He leaned in and whispered something that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. She grabbed him by the collar and kissed him, not with hesitation, but with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I paused the video, closed my eyes. My whole body tingled. What I felt wasn't anger. It was a sadness so deep it hurt in my bones. I rewound the footage, watched again, then again. I didn't need proof anymore. I already knew. But now, I could show. I called Vincent the next morning. He came in with the same lightness as always, still unaware that the ground beneath him was about to collapse. "Grandma, is everything okay? You look..." "Sit down." My voice was calm, but sharp as a blade. I played the video. He stood there, at first confused, then stunned. When the kiss appeared on screen, he inhaled sharply, but said nothing. "That was 3 days before the wedding," I said, locking eyes with him. He rose slowly, walked to the window, pressed his forehead against the cold glass, and whispered, She was with him, this whole time." I didn't answer, because that pain was his, and his alone. Minutes later, Vincent walked out without a word. And I stayed seated, feeling that the ground had finally cracked open. But this time, it wasn't beneath my feet. The days that followed were gray. Not the weather. The soul. The house, once full of sounds and plans, now felt like a picture frame without a painting. Vincent didn't come back that day, or the next, and I didn't go looking for him. It wasn't time for comfort. It was time to let the pain dig deep, so that one day he might grow roots. On Thursday afternoon, Mason called again. Mrs. Rivers, we have enough. More than enough. Are you ready to take the next step? I didn't hesitate. I am. On Saturday, I walked into the office of our longtime family attorney, Greg Cartwright, a methodical man, discreet, loyal to our legacy since the days when my husband was still alive. I brought everything with me: the flash drive, printed photos, Nexus Capital documents, copies of the lawsuits against Richard Taylor, suspicious transactions in Vincent's name. The dossier I never wanted to build was now complete. Greg took the materials silently. His hands trembled slightly as he hit play on the video, and his expression hardened. The face of a man who understood the gravity of what he was seeing. "This changes everything," he murmured after a long pause. I nodded. They tried to destroy my family with smiles and contracts, but now they'll learn that truth isn't fragile, it's patient. Greg immediately began drafting the necessary legal documents: the motion to reverse the asset transfer, the suspension of Vincent's stock allocations to Bianca, the annulment of the prenuptial agreement on grounds of bad faith, and most importantly, a formal request to open an investigation into the connections between Bianca, Richard, and Daniel. While he called other attorneys and began moving the legal pieces across the board, I simply watched. My part was done. My role in this battle was never to shout or beg. It was to expose. The next morning, Vincent came back. His face was worn, unshaven, his eyes hollow. But something was different. A quiet firmness in his steps, a premature, bitter maturity in the way he looked at me. "I saw everything," he whispered, "what they did, and what you did." I said nothing. I waited. He sat in the chair, across from me. He looked smaller somehow, undone. "I was an idiot, Grandma, blind, arrogant, and I treated you like you were in my way." "You didn't betray me, Vincent," I said gently. "You betrayed your own story. But every story can be rewritten, if we're brave enough to tear out the wrong pages." He lowered his head and let the tears fall. We sat there together. No promises, no rush. Just the quiet acceptance that what's broken might never be the same, but it can come back stronger. That night I received an email from Mason. "We've tracked transactions between Richard Taylor and a web of offshore accounts. Money diverted using Vincent's name. Official investigation will begin Monday. Everything you said was true." I closed the laptop, leaned my head back into the chair, and took a deep breath. The war was public now, but my victory was already written. Because he saw. The first hearing took place under a sky far too clear for the storm that was coming. The city outside seemed oblivious to what was unfolding inside. That courtroom. Cars crawled along the streets. Cafes kept serving slices of apple pie. And the church bells rang as if it were just another Monday. But I knew better. That morning wasn't ordinary. It was the day the lie would finally be forced to explain itself. I sat in the third row, right behind Greg. Vincent was beside me, wearing a suit that seemed too big for the weight he was carrying. He didn't say a word, but he held my hand. Tightly, just like when he was a little boy, afraid of thunderstorms. Bianca entered with the same confident stride as always. She wore a light gray dress, elegant, hair perfect, makeup subtle. But her face no longer carried that confident glow. That kind of shine fades when truth gets too close. Beside her, Richard looked like a cornered man. Sweat beaded on his forehead, even with the air conditioner blowing at full blast. The judge entered right on time. Firm voice, sharp gaze. The session began with Greg presenting the evidence, the video. The bank records, the emails, the money transfers between Richard and offshore accounts, Daniel Carter's criminal record, and finally, the prenuptial agreement, now under suspicion of fraud. The defense tried to dismiss it, tried to call it coincidence, tried to buy time. But the truth was right there, naked, cold, irrefutable. The judge suspended part of the proceedings to allow for further criminal investigation, and in that moment, I felt the weight of the last few months finally lift from my shoulders. As we left the courthouse, Vincent hugged me. I let all of this happen. I opened the door for them. You trusted, Vincent. Trusting isn't a mistake. The mistake is not learning from it. He nodded, his eyes brimming. We returned home in the late afternoon. The land was calm, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time in weeks, I walked into the farmhouse without feeling the need to armor myself. That night, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I took the family will and sat down with my lawyers. We rewrote everything. River's name had always stood for hard work, sacrifice, and dignity, and I refused to see it handed over to anyone who didn't understand what it meant. From now on, I said, no one inherits the River's name just by blood. They'll have to earn it. Character, loyalty, wisdom, 3 pillars. Without them, there is no legacy. Greg smiled. That's going to stir things up, Helen. Let it stir. A strong name isn't handed down. It's built. The next day, I called a private family meeting at the house. Only those who still mattered, those who hadn't sold themselves off. I explained everything. The new conditions, the changes, the consequences. Lillian sat in silence, for the first time in a long while, without words. Vincent looked at me with gratitude. What do I have to do to prove I deserve it, Grandma? He asked. Start over, Vincent, and keep your eyes open. Life will test you, but now you know love isn't blind, it's watchful. He nodded, and for the first time, I didn't just see my grandson, I saw the man who might one day carry the name I spent my whole life protecting. Months passed. The farm began to bloom again, as if it somehow knew the worst was behind us. The trees cast their shade without heaviness. The birds sang again, no longer with tension, but with ease. And the wind, oh, the wind no longer carried secrets. The court case moved forward slowly, as all things that require precision should. Bianca vanished from Vincent's life as quickly as she had entered it. Gone. No calls, no letters, no explanations. She took only what no longer mattered, and left behind a lesson no one would ever forget. Richard now faced not just civil lawsuits, but a full-blown criminal investigation. His image as a visionary entrepreneur melted like wax under the light of truth. Daniel disappeared. Sources said he moved to the West Coast, but that no longer mattered. The damage was done, and justice, quiet and steady, was doing its work. But the greatest change didn't happen in the courts. It happened inside us. Vincent started coming by every day. He worked in the fields, fixed what was broken, learned about the land he once dismissed. One day, without warning, he walked into the room with grease-stained hands and a crumpled envelope. I signed the termination papers with Nexus Capital, he said, holding out the document. I'm out. All of it. They don't touch me anymore. I smiled. A quiet smile. Like watching the sun rise after a long winter. Now the real work begins, I replied. I know, and I'm ready. We didn't say anything else, because between those who've weathered a storm together, silence becomes an embrace. Lillian took longer. But one afternoon, she showed up on the porch, eyes red and swollen. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't cry. I just hugged her, the way you hug someone who's finally found their way back home. In the months that followed, we renovated the old bedrooms, reopened the community garden, and began planning a small family business, selling homemade preserves. And local sweets. Vincent came up with the name River's Legacy. So we never forget where we came from, he said, proud. And in that name, simple and strong, I knew something had finally found its rightful place. Today, when I walk across this land, I see more than fertile soil. I see what endured, what was never sold, what no one could ever steal. Truth, honor, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be proved, only lived with integrity. It wasn't me who won. It was dignity.